From the headquarters of FtS English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Members of Venezuela's armed forces have joined the call made by President Nicolas Maduro to sign a letter addressing the people of the United States asking for peace. This is part of the military exercises taking place this week. The activity was headed by the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who reaffirmed the willingness for dialogue and peace, while maintaining the right to defend Venezuela. And over the weekend, Venezuela's Bolivarian Armed Forces carried out the most important military exercises in the country's history. The president was present during the exercises, receiving the full support of the armed forces.
A handshake with the commander-in-chief symbolizes the armed forces' recognition of Nicolas Maduro as president of Venezuela.
The armed forces are more united than ever. During these times of aggression against our people, the armed forces have come together and risen to the task of being even more united than before, with the sole purpose of defending our nation.
They joined together to show Venezuela's defense and anti-air prowess.
The dangers Venezuela is now facing come due to mercenary politicians, from a mercenary diplomacy that stands against international law. We think that the Venezuelan people want peace, and our armed forces are a force of peace. Nonetheless, we're ready to face any sort of aggression or threat.
This is one of the most important military exercises to strengthen the defense of Venezuela's airspace. This was the first missile fired during the exercises. The rocket launcher was given to President Maduro as a keepsake of the armed forces' commitment.
This was the first missile fired by a soldier trained by the revolution, as a testimony of the military and civic union of the armed forces, in compliance with our sacred duty to defend the lands of Bolívar and Chávez.
These are our armed forces, who will defend our airspace and make our cities impregnable. On land, it will be impossible for them to invade, because Bolivar's soldiers are there, and they will make the imperial forces pay a high price if they dare to touch our sacred land. On that basis, I accept this gift, showing your commitment.
The calls of the opposition asking the armed forces to stand behind them have been unsuccessful. From anti-air defense to ground defense, the Bolivarian Armed Forces show their new doctrine, a defense involving all people.
These are the most important military exercises in our recent history. They are so important because of the political context we are living in, because of the real threat posed by the imperialist government of Donald Trump against peace in Venezuela. The imperialist chief has directly threatened us, which has created great indignation and widespread rejection from Venezuelans and from the international community. This has forced us to truly get ourselves ready to defend our right to peace.
Those who have been historically excluded are ready for war, if that's what is necessary to defend peace.
Venezuelans all over the country have been signing a document condemning U.S. imperialism in Latin America. U.S. journalist Max Blumenthal was in Caracas to see it firsthand on Sunday.
Okay, so we're here in Simón Bolívar Square in Caracas, and people are lining up for blocks and blocks to sign a declaration against American imperialism, against American intervention, calling on the U.S. not to intervene and to allow Venezuela to remain in peace. The lines are massive here, and the government is seeking to get 10 million signatures, and you can see just how long the lines are. They're stretching around the block. They're going all the way back here, all the way around this block, and they're filling up the square. And people have been coming all day and will be coming all afternoon to sign this declaration.
And calls against U.S. intervention in Venezuela are gathering momentum across the country.
The media frenzy about Venezuela blocking US aid trucks at the Colombian border has so far been one-dimensional. It ignores the pleas of ordinary Venezuelans who want peaceful resolution.
We have always wanted to live in peace. I have family here and in Colombia. US intervention wants to drive Colombians and Venezuelans into war, despite our calls for peace.
The motto, I sign for peace, is more than that. It's an ideology Venezuelans want to spread globally.
We have given shelter to millions of Colombians, and they know the benefits they have received in our country. We don't want the US to intervene here. We don't want them here.
As the right wing from all over the world beat the war drum, Venezuelans still maintain that war is not the answer.
We, the people, are here collecting signatures, and will do it today, tomorrow, day and night, to support President Maduro and show we are a people of peace. And we ask the people of the United States to stand with us.
People want to confront US foreign policy of aggression from every corner of Venezuela. Their message is clear: respect our sovereignty and our right to self-determination.
Russia plans to present a proposal to the UN Security Council in the hope of finding a solution to the situation in Venezuela. The Russian proposal is a response to the US demand for new elections. It calls for a peaceful solution and a political settlement that includes the mechanism developed in Montevideo last week. Our correspondent in Russia, Hansel Oro, brings us the details.
Russia continues to advocate for the creation of an international forum to develop talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. The Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs confirmed the creation of a project for Venezuela, which looks to get the majority of votes at the UN Security Council. Also, the director of the Latin American Department of Russia's Foreign Ministry, Alexander Shetinin, said that several member nations of the UN Security Council presented other proposals, including the United States, which seeks to impose new elections in Venezuela. This is seen by Russia as yet another act of intervention that looks to delegitimize the elections that took place in Venezuela last May. Russia also opposed the self-proclaimed interim president's policies, which are backed by the West. It also opposes a military intervention in Venezuela, which could have extremely negative consequences, not only for the country, but also for the region. Finally, a committee in the Russian parliament will be formed to investigate cases of interventionism by the US, including in Venezuela.
We thank Hansel for that report. Members of the People's Houses organization in Turkey expressed their total support for Venezuela by collecting signatures. The initiative to show support for the government of Nicolas Maduro took place at the Venezuelan embassy in Ankara. And finally, Venezuelan authorities have announced they want to double its oil sales to India and is open to barter payment arrangements. India is the world's third biggest crude consumer.
We are selling more than 300,000 barrels a day. But of course, we want to increase that. And India also wants to increase the intake from Venezuela. We want to double that amount.
We now move to Argentina, where the third visit by IMF auditors is taking place. They are there to review the fulfillment of economic measures that will allow for the disbursement of $11 billion next March as part of the loan the government has with the International Monetary Fund. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
Roberto Cardarelli, the auditor in charge of Argentina's case with the IMF, has arrived in Buenos Aires. There are big expectations for his visit. On one side, there is a strong rejection from social movements and worker unions that are criticizing his third visit to the country, since the loan agreement was signed between Mauricio Macri's government and the IMF. Cardarelli will meet with Nicolas Maduro, the finance minister and the president of Argentina's central bank, to analyze adjustments planned by the IMF. As many union members have pointed out, the IMF is really behind the economic measures and strong adjustments that are affecting everyday people. This week, they will also meet with bankers and businessmen. A possible meeting is also expected with some opposition leaders to talk about this crisis. There have been widespread rejections by citizens against the IMF and the adjustment policies. Since the loan was agreed upon, over 20,000 small and medium enterprises enterprises have closed, and 127,000 workers lost their jobs. Inflation is expected to reach over 28% this year, as the economic crisis in the country worsens.
At least 2 people have been killed in a helicopter crash in Brazil, including a famous journalist, Ricardo Boechat. Early reports say the aircraft lost control and crashed into a truck on a highway in Sao Paulo. 66-year-old Boechat was a well-known television journalist and a familiar figure in the country. He was returning from a conference and was heading back to his TV station where the crash happened.
When the helicopter crashed, it exploded. The pieces are all over the place. It caught fire. There were bodies on the floor. After 15 minutes, firefighters arrived.
Oi, vai per si stiltas. Welcome back. Guyana's Attorney General has asked the appeals court to keep the country's president and his cabinet in office. That is, until the court decides whether to overturn or uphold a high court ruling that the no confidence motion was passed validly. In his appeal, the AG is also arguing that the Chief Justice erred when she ruled that the vote was valid. Last December, the motion against the government succeeded because of support given by a government backbencher. Since then, the opposition has been calling for fresh elections to be held by March, in keeping with constitutional provisions.
No.
Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holmes is boasting that the country has the highest number of people employed in its history. In light of this, Prime Minister Holmes is assuring that his government will continue to manage economic growth to ensure prosperity and inclusivity.
This is the highest number of Jamaicans employed in the history of the statistic of employment in Jamaica. More young people getting employed, more women getting employed. We're not there yet because the frustration is still there. A lot of young people still saying they don't see the prosperity yet. One thing you can be sure of is that if we continue on this path with this government, you will see the prosperity.
At least 4 people have been killed and dozens injured in Haiti as demonstrations enter a 5th day. Thousands of opposition demonstrators have taken to the streets this week, burning tires, throwing stones, and looting shops. They are demanding that President Jovenel Moïse step down. Haitians accuse Mr. Moïse and other officials of corruption. At the 32nd African Union Summit in Ethiopia, heads of states have made a commitment to addressing forced displacements and security on the continent. Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, says the issue of forced displacement in Africa remains sadly remarkable. He says it's important to tackle the root causes of the issue, and the United Nations has pledged to support this quest.
It is in this context of renewed hope that we increase our mutual support to peace operations in Africa. To consolidate and build on our gains, I have launched the Action for Peacekeeping initiative to enable UN missions to be more effective, better equipped, safer and more robust.
The Loyangolani Desert Museum in North Kenya has made a big impact in preserving Kenyan culture and traditions. Located about 700 kilometers from the capital, Nairobi, in the desert overlooking the Lake Turkana, it is the museum of its kind in East Africa. Built in a semicircle in the fashion of a local traditional homestead, inside it houses a variety of items showing cultures and traditions of local communities.
It houses the history of 6 communities. Every important cultural item is kept here in the museum. International and local tourists come to see what we have here. They pay a fee to enter and the money helps the museum.
The World of Science is currently home to some amazing women from Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. They play a critical role in its development while pushing for gender equality. Let's take a look at some of these trailblazers on the International Day of Women and Girls in Science.
April 8, 1993. It's a date Dr. Ellen Ochoa will never forget. It's the day the Space Shuttle Discovery lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida with Ochoa and 4 other crew members on board. And with that voyage, Ochoa, a Mexican-born optical engineer and astronaut, made history. She became the first Latin American to travel to space. Since then, she's been on 4 NASA missions, logging nearly 1,000 hours in space. Another brilliant aerospace engineer is using her personal story and success to inspire and empower girls, especially those in the Caribbean region. Dr. Camille Waldrop-Alain was born in Trinidad and Tobago. She's one of a few women of color and the only woman of Caribbean descent in a senior management position at NASA in the U.S.
Optical communication is an emerging technology that modulates data onto laser beams, and these laser beams has the potential to transfer data at much faster rates than currently is achievable with radio frequency transmission.
Dominican-born marine biologist Idalisa Bonelli de Calventi is known as the mother of marine conservation in the region. She created the first sanctuary for humpback whales. Several of Bonelli's publications have impacted a country's management and conservation of marine resources of the Atlantic Ocean and represents an important breeding ground for the species. Sudanese physicist Dr. Nashwa Iyasa founded Sudanese Women in Science, and she's also a trailblazer in the field of the sciences. She's done extreme research in nanoparticle physics. She's also working on a project that aims at sanitizing water through solar radiation.
My dream is to help other women to overcome things. Like now we established an organization for Sudanese Women in Science. I've been there, I know the challenges. So my dream to help more women and girls to overcome things and come out and shine. So.
Now meet 24-year-old Cuban-born Sabrina Gonzalez Pastreski. She's been called the next Einstein. When she was just 14, she constructed her own single-engine plane, and all by herself. Now today, this brilliant physicist's work focuses on black holes, gravity and space and time. 46% of researchers in Latin America and the Caribbean are women. This is compared with a world average of 29%, citing statistics published by UNESCO. These women trailblazers are hoping to inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is considering calling elections for April 14th of this year. This news comes as lawmakers are set to debate his government's 2019 budget proposal this week. Sánchez's previous budget was supported by parties in favor of Catalan independence, but their support is unlikely after the administration distanced itself from meaningful negotiations with the movement. Our correspondent in Madrid, Adriana Cardoso, has the details.
The 14th of April could be the date to hold the next general election if the national budget is not approved. The government needs the support of parties that are in favour of Catalan independence in order to pass the national budget. Parties that have already said they probably will vote against the budget. Last Friday, the government said negotiations with the parties that support an independent Catalan were finished. The Vice President, Carmen Calvo, said these parties now have to decide whether or not to support the budget because the government will not make any other offers. About 50,000 people rallied in Madrid on Sunday to demand elections in a demonstration organised by the right and far-right wing. The 14th of April has not been confirmed by the government yet, but if approved, the government would have to dissolve Parliament next week. The other option is that the government could call for elections in May, the same time European elections will take place. All of this if the national budget is not approved in the next few days.
We thank Adriana for that report. And moving on, the governor of California in the U.S. has announced the withdrawal of hundreds of troops from the U.S.-Mexican border, going against President Donald Trump's policy to militarize the border. Governor Gavin Newsom said in the strongest terms, quote, "The border emergency is nothing more than a manufactured crisis, and California's National Guard will not be part of this political theater." The first two women Muslim representatives in the U.S. Congress have backed the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. Ilhan Omar has accused the Tel Aviv government of discrimination against Palestinians, saying it is similar to apartheid. Meanwhile, Rashida Tlaib says the BDS movement can call attention to issues like racism and human rights violations. The campaign focuses on the institutions that sustain and finance Israeli policy in occupied Palestinian territory. Tensions are rising in Washington once again over United States President Donald Trump's plan to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. There's a risk of another government shutdown. Our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge Gestoso, has the details.
Thank you. Friday is coming very soon here in Washington, and with Friday is a new deadline, the new possibility of a shutdown between Democrats and President Trump. And again, the central issue is the wall. President Trump insists that he wants $5.7 billion to build a wall. Democrats are not ready to give up. It seems there's a possibility of a halfway solution of between $1.7 and $2 billion could eventually work. Anyway, in that case, Trump is saying that he will get the money from somewhere else. Today, we're going to see a new confrontation between Democrats and Republicans. President Trump is flying to El Paso in Texas, border city, and he's trying to push, he's going to make his, again, pitch for the necessity of building a wall, because he believes that it's a national security issue, which figures shows that it's not true. Even Republicans in his own party say that it's not such thing as a national security threat going on. And he's going to try to quote eventually numbers, figures that also has been fact-checked that are being incorrect. He's trying to sell the idea that in El Paso, after a wall has been built, security has improved. That is not true. Figures are showing that security has been better even before a piece of the wall has been built. What is very interesting is that Congressman from Texas and possible presidential candidate of the Democratic Party, Beto O'Rourke, is at the same time that President Trump is trying to sell his idea of the wall, Beto O'Rourke is doing an anti-wall rally to prove exactly the opposite. And Beto O'Rourke, according to polls, is one of the favorites to become a nominee for the Democratic Party regarding the presidential election. So we're going to have to watch two things. If negotiations are advancing to try to avoid a shutdown on Friday, and what's going on today in that President Trump versus Beto O'Rourke pro-wall and anti-wall rallies. We'll go back to you now.
Thank you, Jorge, for your information. And now it's time to bring you more stories from around the world.
China has hit back at Turkey's claims over its treatment of the Muslim minority and has strongly denied the death of a famous poet that Turkey says died in custody. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has called this an absurd lie and on Sunday released a video of a man who identified himself as the poet.
The Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesperson's statement said that the famous Uyghur folk musician Heyit died in prison while serving his second year of sentence. But I saw his video online yesterday showing that he's not only alive, but also very healthy.
A newborn baby has been rescued from a stormwater drain in South Africa after being stuck there for several hours. Emergency services spent 3 hours rescuing her. According to local reports, she has mild hypothermia and escaped with a few minor abrasions. She's now recovering in hospital. A Thai activist group has submitted a petition to the electoral authorities in Thailand demanding that the Thai Raskachat party be banned. The party named the king's sister, Princess Obul Ratana, as a candidate for prime minister. However, she's now been disqualified from standing on the say-so of the king. Meanwhile, the party has appealed to the Elections Commission to examine whether the prime minister is qualified for his position, as he's a retired army general.
And finally, on this day, almost 3 decades ago, anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela was released from prison after being incarcerated for 27 years. After leaving prison, he was driven to the Cape Town City Hall, where he addressed more than 50,000 supporters. His release followed the relaxation of apartheid laws and the unbanning of the African National Congress. Mandela's release from prison was the first step in the journey towards a new South Africa. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.